Hey everyone! So I've been hearing from a lot of us that we need a little bit of a revisit on some color mixing techniques, helping us recognize color. So I've got a huge kit of these. I bought it because they're itty bitty and I wanted a lot of paint. So I have like 60 colors, but that means that maybe 24 of them are useful. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, or that I would do anytime you get new paints, anytime you get a new medium, anytime you get a new kit, is to swatch them out and also make a color wheel with your different colors. So I'm swatching these out. I'm using a lot of water actually as I drag them out. This one time I want you to do that. Or if you're going for watercolor effects. But the reason we use a lot of water is because we're looking for the undercolor, undertones. There it is. Hey. So we're looking for the undertones of each of these colors. You can see as I'm pulling them out, they look red when I put them down. I've got 8 reds here that should theoretically all be red. They say red on them. They're not. So the reason we're pulling them out with a lot of water is A, so you can look at the opacity later when you're checking for what color you might want to use, and also B, to see the undertones. A lot of reds are going to have either an orange undertone or a very pinkish undertone. Some of them turn hot pink as soon as you start to thin them out. So that's, especially with your reds, a very useful thing to do. Looking at these, I would then go through and label them each as I've put these down in order so I can go through and label each of them. And then I will also do that with my yellows and my blues. You can see I've got a whole bunch of yellows, a whole bunch of blues, and we're going to look for the truest primaries we can find in each tone. So for the red, I chose this one, which is second from the top, to do our color wheel with. I like to put down the paint pretty heavy so it's super opaque at the top, and then mix it with a bit of white just so I can see what kind of tints I'd be able to get. You can use this as an opportunity to practice your blending and do it really smoothly, and then you'd be able to see all the different colors, but I sort of break it down to like 3 quick ones, sort of a touch of white blended, and then a very, very blended out pastel version of it right at the center of the circle there. So I've got a bright yellow that's got no orange in it, and a blue that has no green in it, and I'm using these as my 3 primaries for the sake of this specific color wheel. So as you know, if you're mixing for the secondary colors, you're going to do a 50-50 mix. You will be surprised at how little the yellow actually changes the paint. It's because at least my set of acrylics, my yellows aren't as opaque, so they don't have as much of a pigment load, so they don't transform it as much. But a 50-50 mix of each, and then you'll add a little bit of the one to the side of that. So if I've made a green, I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to it and create a medium between the yellow and the green, a yellow-green. Same with the orange, a yellow-orange, a blue-green, more like a plum or a violet to mix between that like purple color that's in the middle, right? And then usually this one sort of turns maroon. I started the wrong one. There you go. And a maroon. So I'm still adding white into the center of each of these. The other nice thing that you can see by adding the white is that the white sort of grays your colors out in a certain way. It doesn't just make them lighter, it also tends to dampen them a bit. So I would then go around and do a little shading out on the outside of your circle with your blacks. I'm using a cool black here, a Mars black. You can see when I pull it out with water in the same way we did the others, it's got an undercurrent of blue. And I'd go around and do the whole outside of your color wheel with a touch of black just so you can see what tinting it and shading it really looks like. So now we're going to jump over and look at creating neutrals with your basic primary colors. So if you mix all 3 primaries in equal amounts together, theoretically you should make black. It almost never makes perfect black because each of your colors, as we've discussed, has some undertones and different things. But if you go across the color wheel and do complementary colors, so green and red, purple and yellow, stuff like that, then you will get a nice range of neutrals. And you can kind of play with it because what you're doing is changing the balance. So when we're mixing yellow and purple, we're mixing mostly yellow and just a touch of blue and a touch of red in equal amounts. And then you can kind of choose, if you're mixing heavier on the yellow, you want a warmer palette. You're mixing heavier on the purple, you want a little bit of a cooler neutral. Probably the complementary colors I use the most when I'm mixing, especially skin tones, are red and green. They make a fantastic neutral range of colors that you can then add white into. If you go a little more on the red, you get a warmer tone. If you go a little more on the green, you get a cooler tone. And once you add white to them, they kind of gray out also, and they get lighter, and you have a wide range of different neutral colors that you can use for skin tones or shadows or, you know, anything, dirt, whatever. The other way that this becomes really useful, and something I think that we forget about sometimes when we're mixing colors, is if I have pure yellow and I do just the tiniest touch of purple into it, I get a really nice, you know, just muted yellow. So I like to use this color theory wheel system by Beverly Gilbert. It's got a lot of different color wheels with different tints and ranges, so you can sort of start to get some ideas of how to mix colors and how colors play together. So when we're talking about these like undertones, you can now sort of look at your primary colors and identify that if your undertone has a little pink in it, it's probably leaning more towards the purple side. And you're going to want to mix, thinking of it as like somewhere in between a red and a purple. So one way to do that is to look at these kind of color wheels and break it down. So a little color theory exploration for us all. So this is a very saturated, looks very similar to the colors we just mixed with, more of a true color wheel with true primaries. They've mixed heading towards center with a bit of black so that they can see the shades of it. And then this is those same primaries with a touch of white. So that's more like what we're seeing here in the middle of our color wheel that we made. And then this with the shades would be more like on the outside if you did that little test with your blacks. So you could almost line them up and see kind of the continuation of color all the way from a very pale pastel into a darker shaded color. So then you can look at something more like a pastel palette like this, which is if a little tiny bit of those earth tones, like we did with that yellow, if a little bit of the complementary color is added in and then tinted down with white, you get this sort of muted, paler palette. So you can identify that there's a little bit of yellow, a touch of purple, just the smallest amount, and then a touch of white, and you get these like very muted tones. So this is a warm earth tone, so that means that everything, when they did the same thing, a little bit of complementary color, but they're leaning more on warmer complementary colors. So if you're mixing red and green and you want like a red that's a little muted down, you're going to use more of a yellow green versus a blue green to mute it. You're going to get a warmer neutral then. Exact opposite. This is a cool earth tone palette, so when they're mixing across, if you're kind of pulling yellow and purple, then you're going to mix with a bluish purple instead of a reddish purple to help you make sure that you're getting those cooler tones. And you're also, if you start shading in, you can see they added black getting towards center. You're going to use a cool black like the one we used in that little demo at the beginning. And in the other one, if you are going to be shading black into it and you want warm to stay in it, you're going to use a warmer black. So there are, Mars black is a cool black. There are some that have more of a reddish or a yellow undertone. You'll just have to do that water pull-out test to see what the undertones are. And this is if you're adding white to it, you can see that like the difference in the warm earth tones versus the cool earth tones become even more apparent to some extent when you're adding the white in, because it keeps that undertone. So sometimes it is useful to use something like these just to break down the colors to help you see it a little clearly. These are also for making color palettes, so if you're like designing a poster or something, sometimes it's nice to use these to select all the colors that are going to be in it. I like to use this complementary one because I think we often think of only the complementary colors that are part of the primaries, right? So we think of like yellow to purple, but there's also like yellow green to mauve, you know, so you can get a little bit of a different understanding when you really break it down. That's what's nice about looking at these, and also then kind of comparing it back to the palette that you might be making, is that we're kind of skipping over a whole bunch of different hues that are in between these that we've broken out. There are a multitude of colors in the world that you can create with just these three paints like we're using in white and black. So these are the obvious ones, like pure yellow to pure purple, but there's also ones that are like that kind of greenish blue, like teal to like an orangey or even a red will also create a bit of muting and a bit of complementary saturation. So I think that using the complementary colors and the ones across from them can be really useful in perfectly customizing the color that you're mixing with, as well as identifying those undertones. I think that's what, to me, I always need to know those undertones before I can be mixing any kind of color with them. So for this, you can also think about mixing in a wider range from the other side. It's another way to think of it. So instead of mixing just green with red to get a color, I might see what happens if I mix that green with an orange. I'm going to get a much warmer, but still a little muting, or the green with the more like purpley pinkish tones. I'm still going to get muted, but it's going to be cooler.
Anything from all three?
Now here is where we're talking about theoretically, if you mixed all three of these things that are perfectly on different parts of the circle, you would get black, right? I still think it is very useful occasionally to create our own blacks because you can tint them. So you can create black and include just a touch more of the warm or just a touch more of the cool or whatever. You can have a lot more control over it that way. So that's just a little bit of breaking down our color theory for us some more.
When you're looking at
So
these and you can see the
I think if you're having trouble with it,
that
the first thing I would do is swatch out all your colors. It's nice to know them. You could see even as I'm pulling them out of the tube, they are not the color they say they are or look like they are on the tube, and certainly the undertones aren't represented. So if you can swatch them out with a bit of water and find out what's inside each of your paints, like what they're using to make them up, how much white is in it, that's going to be really useful for you. And good luck.
All right.